going on now. It's the Memorial Day sale at Bray & Scarf. Now's your last chance to beat upcoming manufacturer price increases. Save up to 35% on select GE Profile and Cafe appliances. And save on in-stock GE refrigerators and best-selling washers and dryers. Plus, get next-day delivery, online delivery day tracking, and delivery day installation. Visit any of Bray & Scarf's convenient locations or shop online at brayandscarf.com, where it doesn't cost more to get more.
With McValue at McDonald's, you don't just get deals on the drinks. You get deals on McDonald's drinks. So when you're breaking a sweat, embrace the chill without breaking the bank. And when your crew is running on empty, keep your wallet full while refreshing the squad.
Ace the vibe check with drinks like lemonade, frozen Fanta Blue Raspberry, or any size drink for just $1.49. Limited time only. Price and participation may vary. Cannot be combined with any other offer. Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.
Frequency Podcast Network. Stories that matter, podcasts that resonate.
Buying a cottage, really? In this economy? Well, the springtime real estate season has been as soggy as the weather. Home sales are down across the country. It's been no better in cottage country or the recreational market. And for people looking to sell what they bought during the pandemic, well, in some markets, properties are selling at a discount. The trade war and constant threat of tariffs and all of the uncertainty that that's caused are not helping, leading to a lack of buyer confidence. The spring cottage country market report issued by RE/MAX says that buyers are staying on the sidelines, even though 34% of Canadians who are considering making a purchase of a cabin or cottage over the next 1 or 2 years still see recreational property as a good investment. As the old saying goes, they're not making any more land or beachfront. Joining me to talk about the state of the cottage market this spring is Kingley Ma, Area Vice President at RE/MAX Canada. Kingley Ma, thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
So, the springtime cottage season, Kingsley, is off to kind of a sluggish start, kind of like the weather in certain parts of Canada. It's not heating up like it typically would this time of year. What are you seeing in the marketplace right now for cottage country, whether that's in Ontario or BC or elsewhere?
Well, if you take a look at Canada as a whole, the cottage cabin sector of real estate, it's actually better than the overall performance of the real estate market, just because there's a couple factors that has to do with it. In fact, there's actually a 1.8% increase in terms of national price. However, that's really dependent on the market that you're looking at. There are markets that are buyer's market, and there's some that are seller's market, and so it's not the general statement. It's not the same for every single market out there.
What are the driving factors? Because all we've heard all spring and since the start of the Trump administration really has been the overhang, the spillover effect of the U.S. tariffs, trade, on and on it goes, risk of an economic slowdown. Is that what is really weighing on the cottage sector as well? Or is this at the same time also a bit of a hangover from the COVID era when everybody wanted to buy a cottage and now maybe not so much?
Well, I mean, certainly the tariff situation and the political landscape has made an impact on the situation on the real estate overall. Because what is happening is that it's created a lot of uncertainty for buyers either investing in a recreational property now, right? Because when you look at real estate, the basic is what the price is, which actually has softened in most areas. Interest rate obviously is lower than previous year. We were originally forecasting that there would be an increase in demand in terms of recreational home, but because of the tariff situation and the uncertainty that created for consumers, a lot of people are on the sideline because the basic is, can I afford the home? Like if I take a mortgage, if I don't have a job, how am I going to pay the mortgage and the bills itself, right? So that's where I think took a little bit of a turn after January of this year, that everybody's on the sideline hesitant to make a purchase. However, there are some interesting findings out of the whole situation itself, because now a lot of Canadians who used to have homes in the States or like a recreation home in the States are now because of the whole situation, they're looking to sell the home and perhaps taking the money back into Canada and purchasing a recreational property here in Canada. So that's where the situation changed, because now there's more Canadians actually looking for recreational property. And traditionally, if you look at rec properties, you think, a lot of the boomer generation or the retirees looking to make the purchase of a recreational home because of the demographic itself. However, you mentioned COVID, and COVID changed a lot of things, and that's where people, a lot of people that are working, they're allowed to work from home. They don't have to necessarily go into the metro areas to go into the city. Then they start looking at, well, maybe if I can buy a recreational property as my primary home for my family, where I get space, I get a good environment, I get lakes and everything like that, and work out of there instead. Even though it could be 2 hours away or 3 hours away from metro areas where they used to be have to go into their offices and things like that. So 80% of the buyers are actually family people looking for either as their primary home or even a place to live for months instead of retirees.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but are there not different qualification levels for when you're taking out a mortgage on a recreational property as opposed to a principal residence?
There is slight differences, but that also depends on the province. I think there's different regulations to that one. But that's where I was mentioning, is that a lot of people are using it as their primary home now, right? Where the mortgage then would be different. However, if you're really looking at like a cabin or recreational property, the insurance is where it's a big difference, right? Because if you're buying a place where there could be forest fires or things like that, then insurance sometimes don't even cover it. So when buyers are looking into buying a rec property, yes, like you said, the mortgage rules might be a little bit different, but they also have to be able to check like insurance or property tax and things like that. But those factors do add up, right? In terms of the cost of ownership for the rec properties.
Do you know offhand as well that from a rental standpoint, is it a situation where you've got a mortgage on a recreational property, you were hoping to rent it out X number of weeks a year to cover that? Has that dynamic changed at all, where people are having a hard time renting some of these things?
Well, it depends on the area, because certain area has different rules. Like, for example, Okanagan, there are areas where you're not even allowed to do Airbnb, so it has to be like monthly rentals. Generally speaking, if you're doing monthly rentals for a couple months a month, you're able to do that. The demand is still there. However, if you are looking to do, short term where you can you can make more. However, the rules, like in BC, certain areas you can't even do it because it's banned to do Airbnb. So that has taken impact. So if you're looking at buying a rec property as an investment itself, it might not be the best to do it now because of the regulations and everything like that. If you're strictly going for the cap rate, right? What's the return on investment on it? However, if you're looking at monthly long-term rentals, I don't think that has make a significant impact.
You were talking off the top about, depending where the recreational or cottage country area that you're looking at, very different across the country. For example, and again, some of these have only had a few sales for the year, others have had more. So again, the comparables are a little bit perhaps skewed. But on your list of big movers so far, Banff, for example, up 28% on price year over year. But on the flip side of that, Aurelia down 16% on the southern end of Muskoka, and Grand Bend is down 20%. So again, it really depends on maybe how far these prices had climbed or had risen during COVID, and how much they're actually starting to cool off now, and how many sellers are out there. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, you have to take a look at where the price point is for each area. That really tells a lot about where the market is at. There are areas that are more affordable as a rec home. That's where the demand is. So in Alberta, actually, if you think about Alberta in a whole generally, the market has been really hot in Alberta, whether or not it's rec property or just general real estate, because of the migration into the area. There's a lot of people wanting to move into that city itself. So like either you could be from Toronto or Vancouver moving into Alberta, and then you go, well, if I can spend $1 million and I get a nice, huge like rec property, whereas I can only buy that, maybe a townhome in Vancouver, right? But then that becomes a luxury item in Alberta. So there's a lot of demand, people moving, migrating into Alberta and other areas that have lower price point. It doesn't just have to be Alberta.
Yeah, just seeing some other ones here. Prince Edward Island up 43%. Now the median price is $525,000, so it's much less expensive than say Muskoka or Whistler is at almost 1.9 or just above 1.9 million on the average price, and yet all prices there are up 13.5%. So it's kind of interesting the vagaries between the market. Longer term, though, just going through your assessment of the cottage market for 2025, from an investment standpoint, the consensus is, it's a good long-term investment. Short-term, certainly volatile. And the fact you mentioned this about Americans or Canadians selling their American properties and maybe coming north of the border. I mean, the idea of a staycation is in Canada seems to me that's probably a rising trend this year.
Yeah, it is a rising trend, and then we originally, like I mentioned earlier, we were forecasting an increase in overall markets, whereas because of the situation of the tariffs, it kind of leveled off. But I think once the tariff situation settles, the market for the rec property will pick up, and there are demands for it. Like I mentioned earlier, there are families that wanting these to move into these rec properties to give their own family a better livability, right? So, and I mean, there's a lot of Canadians who's worried about, buying in the US, right? So that's why they're looking to, rather than looking to go down south, they rather spend their money in Canada to buy those, staycation, right? So that's where the changes are.
Was there much there? I seem to recall more or less anecdotal evidence that there was a little bit of sales activity last year when the previous government was talking about and had that capital gains inclusion tax increase, which may have led to a bit of a sales bump. Has that basically been smoothed out, I suppose? You're still looking, though, at capital gains issues when we're talking about transfers to family, retirement issues, all these kinds of things that are also something you have to keep in mind when buying recreational property, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Because these are all part of it, especially if you're looking at it as an investment. There's definitely capital gains when you're selling or passing it to your next generation too, right? But what's interesting is that from our report itself, it's transferring from one generation to another is actually not as high as people would think. Like from parents to the next generation, but like you mentioned, like if you're using it in an investment, then you have to be very, you have to be cautious about, at some point in your life when you sell it, then there's going to be capital gains and things like that. However, people generally that buy rec properties, they do keep it for a longer term. It's not anything that's like fast investment where I could sell and make money and things like that. They do use it, even though it might not be the whole year, but they do spend, a couple of months out of the year in those rec properties.
Well, part of it too is the fact that when you're dealing with generational property transfer, you could have multiple people in a family or multiple kids, and the parents can't figure out which one to give it to or transfer, and then you get on the whole internal squabbling. So that might have something to do with it too.
Yeah, those will have something to do with it. But it depends on how they structure it, right? Because the parent who's thinking about transferring at some point in their life, then they have to structure it properly to look at the tax complication, right? To see who they should do it and how they should do it. And I mean, obviously, as a professional, as a accountant, to do it properly. But that's something they really have to think about.
Last point or question I have. Initially, when we saw the flurry of buyers in the recreational market back in 2021, 22, we were looking at historic lows for borrowing costs. The Bank of Canada has been cutting rates, but has been a little bit hesitant of late because of inflation and other things. But does that have as big of an impact on the recreational property space?
Not as much as the real estate in general space, but you got it absolutely right. Because if you've taken a loan out in 2020, 2021, the interest rate was significantly low. And if you did a 5-year term, you're right around now that you have to take a look at renewing that mortgage, right? And then with the percentage, it's still significantly higher than during COVID days. It was close to zero. But they have to be careful. Like, it becomes an affordability issue. Now you're looking at at least a couple $100 more than what you paid, 5 years ago in terms of the mortgage. So that is something to consider. But there are probably going to be more, sellers out there. So I would expect inventory should increase a little bit. And the part is that hopefully when the tariff situation really settles, the buyers are going to come back, so that it would still be a very balanced and healthy market where there's sellers looking to sell and then buyers wanting to move into those properties. So we would assume that once the tariff situation settles, then there's going to be a lot more activities in the recreational property side.
It should be an interesting summer. Kingley Ma, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
And that was Kingley Ma, Area Vice President at RE/MAX Canada. You've been listening to In This Economy. If you have any questions or story ideas, you can email me at mike.eppel, that's E-P-P-E-L, at rci.rogers.com. Follow us on X on our partner podcasts at The Big Story FPN. Or leave a voicemail at 416-935-5935. You can also find us on the Seeker app. Please rate, review, follow, and share. My name is Mike Eppel. Thanks for listening.